So hello, today I'm at St Mary the Virgin's Church in Fryerning in Essex, and I'd like to talk to you about the history of the church and the village itself. So Fryerning is a small village in Essex. It's 1.5 miles from Ingatestone and it's 6 miles from Billericay. The village is surrounded by undulating farmland and is most picturesque. The elevation here is 70 metres or 230 feet in old money. The population is around 255 feet. Now the history of Fryerning is very diverse. Now the last great ice age actually stopped right here around 11,700 years ago. The wall of ice and rock would have been visible from St Mary's as it retreated, leaving huge glacier stones, and 3 of these are still located in nearby Ingatestone. And if we take this turn to the right, that will go to Ingatestone, just a few miles. Now Fryerning and its church stands on high ground, making it level with the top of Ingatestone's spire of their church, just over a mile away. And this is St Mary the Virgin's Church in front of us. Now in nearby Mill Green, a Roman villa once stood, its bricks now embedded in the parish church walls. The ing part of Fryerning seems to originate from the Saxon place Ginges. Other villages here formed part of it, such as Ingatestone, Margaretting and Mount Nessing. Now during the Saxon period, Siward was the lord of the manor here, and Siward was a very wealthy Saxon owning 67 manors, but after 1066 he owned none. Now the Normans granted the manor to Robert de Gernon, who had 9 smallholders and 1 villager and 3 slaves under him, and a plough team and 26 sheep and 17 pigs right here, making Fryerning a fairly large settlement. Now Robert de Gernon was also the tenant-in-chief, giving him complete authority here. Now Robert came over with William the Conqueror, and he would be 21 at the Battle of Hastings, I worked it out. Originally from Mount Fitchett in Normandy. He would die in Stansted Mount Fitchett, Essex in the same year. In the same year that the Domesday Book was written. And it would be his grandson, Gilbert Mount Fitchett, who would inherit half of Fryerning's Ginges. Now Robert Gernon was also related to William the Conqueror and was known as the Duke of Boulogne. In England he In England he attacked the Iron Age fort at Stansted Mount Fitchett, and his grandson then changed his name to Mount Fitchett. Now Gilbert's mother was Margaret de Clare, and the de Clares were also kinsmen of William the Conqueror and were also at the Battle of Hastings. Now Gilbert would go on to give Fryerning Manor and its church to the Order of the Knights Hospitaliers of Jerusalem of St John. Now the knights would protect the hospital in Jerusalem, which provided care for the sick, poor and injured pilgrims to the Holy Land during the First Crusade. The Knights Hospitaliers would go on to build 7 great forts across Syria and own much land and wealth. The Holy Roman Emperor pledged to protect the Knights of St John in a charter of privileges dated 1185. The knights from Fryerning would make regular visits to their English headquarters in Clerkenwell, London, at St John's Gate. It's still there today, and now it is a museum. And we shall look closer at the sign in front. That was a nice car. Now the founder of the order is said to be connected to nearby Mount Nessing and the Toby Priory. And I did read that half a Knights Templar was actually dug up from the priory during a previous century. If we zoom in on the sign, we can still see the Cross of St John. And so the knights would own Fryerning's manor and its church right up until Henry VIII. Henry's father, Henry VII, was a protector of the Hospitaliers, but did not fund them inadequately against Suleiman the Magnificent. And Henry VIII carried on the protection and privileges to the knights, but later dissolved the Clerkenwell headquarters under the dissolution of the monasteries. Most of the knights then retired to their stronghold in Malta. Now by 1540, Genghis Fryern, as Fryerning was known, was owned by the Crown and then given on to Sir William Banners, Henry's royal auditor. Now by the end of the 16th century, the manor passed on to the Earls of Oxford. Edward, the 17th Earl, was champion jouster, competing across France and Italy. Finally, the old manor passed to Sir Nicholas Wadham and his wife Dorothy. Now Nicholas would found Wadham College in Oxford in 1610. In fact, his wife Dorothy was left to create the college as Sir Nicholas died a year before. Wadham College, as it turns out, has been a patron of St Mary's Church ever since 1620. Interestingly, Dorothy was in fact the daughter of Sir William Peter of Ingatestone Hall, just the other side of the old Roman road here. Now Fryerning had at one time an ale taster in the 14th century, and we're not there right at the moment. It was in True Love's Lane, which still bears his name, for the English have always taken their beer very seriously. Now even in 1272, a pint of beer must be a pint, and Fryerning's ale taster's role was a combination of trading standards and checking the weights and measurements were correct. The ale taster would send the guilty publican to the stocks here or even jail. And the job, as you can imagine, would require a certain amount of drinking. Now we're looking down Beggar Hill, and this is where the homeless people would probably live. And directly in front of us we look at one of the finest barns from the time of the Knights Hospitaliers. Still a barn today. To the side of the road you come across these ponds, now dried up because of the drought, but Fryening's got a series of these on the map and nobody's quite sure of their original purpose. It could well be they were part of the original moat from the Saxon times. Now Mill Green is an interesting part of this village. It is the only pub in England to be called the Viper. Now in the 20th century the Viper became part of the world's biggest brewery, Truman's. Two families, the Halls and the Beards, would run this pub until 1989, when it would be owned and go as an independent pub. It sits surrounded by this ancient forest, much the same as it would have looked from the days of the Saxon and Celtic ancestors. It's likely its name came from the common here, which was infested once by England's only poisonous snake, the adder, or a viper. The Viper pub is well known today for its annual beer festivals. Now also in Mill Green, the Disney family once lived in a house called Hyde, and the Hyde burnt down in 1965. John Disney Sr. was famous for his collections of antiquities. The Disney family came over with William the Conqueror, a very old family, and a branch would settle here in the Hyde. It was a grand house, 3 stories high, and I actually counted 24 windows on the front alone. Now John Disney Sr. was in fact a reverend, and he would inherit the Hyde and all its antiquities in 1804. And many of the sculptures came from Rome and Naples in Italy. And when John died in 1816, his son, also John, would take over, helping establish Chelmsford Museum. And in 1849, aged 70, he would offer his extensive collection to the University of Cambridge for the study of archaeology. John Disney is buried in the family tomb here at Fryening's church, and I read that the old Hyde house burned for 3 hours. All that remained was a pair of wooden gates with the family crest embedded upon them. Now Fryening is also very famous in the medical world, for in 1767 a Daniel Sutton, together with a Mr. Tatum and Wick, set up a smallpox inoculation house. Daniel himself inoculated over 22,000 people, and he would set up a chain of clinics across England, Europe and North America. Now he found that by infecting a healthy person with the cowpox, they would become immune from the deadly smallpox. Now, Daniel would publish a book late in his career, and he was all but forgotten by then. But the King of England would grant him and his family crest, and this gave him gentleman status. A knighthood never came. Now Daniel would hire 2 houses in nearby Ingatestone, where his patients would be staying for up to a month. In 1 year alone he would make £400,000 in today's money. But the innkeepers of Ingatestone were not in favour. And Daniel would use his wealth to purchase a cow farm and a house called Masonette, still in existence here somewhere. Amazingly, Daniel Sutton had no formal medical qualifications and was described as a quack. Either way, his inoculation houses would have saved countless lives. Cricket's popular now and popular then. A young lad, Charles Courtright, was born here in Fryerning, is still described by academics as the fastest bowler of all time. He was boarding at Brentwood's school, not so far from here. Courtright would climb out of the dormitory window at 4 a.m. to practice cricket with his classmates. Now Courtright would go on to play against the cricket legend W. Grace, smashing 2 of Grace's stumps. As Grace turned for the pavilion, Courtright shouted, "Surely you're not going, Doc? There's still 1 stump standing." W.G. Grace was not impressed. Fryerning also attracted one of England's star cricket players, Alfred Perry Lucas, who was also played against W.G. Grace in 1877. In his old age he would play for Essex. Lucas would be in his early days play against Australia 3 years before. Now the Ashes match it would start 3 years before. The Ashes were even created in 1882. I assumed he lived here in his retirement. Now we shall look at St Mary's Church itself. The walls are made from coursed lumps of pudding stone, flint rubble and a fair amount of Roman brick and tile. The church is of an incredible age. The nave and the chancel, which we see before us, are from the 11th century. So let us look at this pudding stone closely. We can see how it's fused together. So this would be from the last great ice age. And as you can see, the wall is made of a huge amount. Now we're looking at the West Tower, built in the 16th century, most likely Thomas Wolsey's architect, who built Hampton Court, also designed this fine Tudor tower, made in Tudor brick. Now I read that the tower was commissioned by the Knights Hospitaliers. It replaced an earlier wooden structure and the supports were actually found. Now today's tower is 12 foot square, it's built in red brick, it's got diaper patterns in black headers, which are the black bricks, and it's built in 3 stages with an embattled parapet. Now each angle has an octagonal pinnacle. The northeast corner has a stair turret. Now I know this brickwork really well because I actually painted it in watercolour. And the church is going to make postcards, and any sold will go towards church restorations. Now we're on the northeast corner and you can clearly see the stair turret. It's quite a big piece of structure. Now we're facing the south wall, and if you look you can see a blue brick fish which represents early Christian symbol used in the time of Rome and St Peter, I believe. Isn't that amazing? Now we're looking at the Victorian Ports, fairly recent really. It's built in 1869. So that'll be 100 years before my birthday. In this year, the first international cycle race was held at Crystal Palace, London, and Sainsbury's opened its very first store in Drury Lane, London. I would say that Victorians made their work to last. Have a closer look. So as you enter this 1869 porch, you're faced with the structure excuse me, which is built in oak. And have used traditional methods, putting the dowel pegs through there. Now as you enter this porch, look at the floor. We have some 13th century coffin lids, stone. And a further one here. So now we're looking at the south door. This was an early Norman door, and you can see the original stone jambs. If you look closely, you can see some graffiti there. I also noticed the echelon is upside down, most unusual. So we should go in. Let's have a look at the view. So now we're inside the church. We're now facing the nave. Now this measures 44 feet by 21 feet and it's 11th century. Now the walls here are 3 feet thick and there are 5 Norman lancet windows. So if we pan back around we can see, I'll just show you how thick the wall is. So as you enter the church, if you just look at the south doorway you can clearly see the thickness of the wall. So one of these lancet windows has been blocked up and it's still visible from the outside. The 1869 restoration placed the flat roof which existed, giving it more light and elevation. And we can have a look at that. It's almost like a barrel vaulted ceiling on it now. So now we've moved down from the south door towards the chancel, and now we're facing the piscina. It's most likely the association with the altar, dated to around the 12th century. Isn't that amazing, that age? Now we're facing the south door again, or the west side. But if you look straight ahead, we've got an incredibly ancient font. We'll have a closer look. Now this font, originally carved from cairn stone in Normandy, France, was from the 12th century. It's possibly donated by Matilda, mother of King Henry II. Now Matilda donated similar fonts to churches at Little Laver and Abbess Rodin, also in Essex. And we'll have a look at the designs. So on the north side we have the vine, and you can clearly see the vine itself and the grapes, I guess, or the leaves. Remember, 12th century, it's amazing, isn't it? On the west side we have the cross and the crown. I don't know why, but this has always been my favourite angle of the font. On the south side, we've got the sun, the moon, and the stars. These are stars. And if we look, we can see perhaps something has been removed. There's some inscription there, most likely medieval. Now we're facing the east side. This is the Tree of Jesse. Now the Tree of Jesse depicts the ancestors of Jesus Christ. Now, Jesse was the father of King David, who also came from Bethlehem. Now we're actually standing under the West Tower, and there's various memorials here. This must be in connection to that picture and the newspaper article. We've got Exodus there written, and if we pan along here, we've got a memorial. I guess it's the First World War, and it lists those brave men that never returned. And a picture to remember Her Majesty the Queen, who just passed recently. So now we're facing the chancel, and it's 11th century. It measures 20 feet by 17 feet. And outside the coins are of Roman brick, and we'll have a look. It's likely that the Normans demolished a nearby Roman villa at Mill Green. If you look, you've got Harvest Festival soon, and the ladies here, I guess the flower arranging group, have made some lovely flowers. And I actually always think these are plastic, but these are definitely real. Most beautiful. Now, if I pan backwards, you can see a curtain above, which would have been the opening for the rood stairs. And there's the doorway, I guess. And behind that curtain would be the opening. So this church has got a kind of rood screen. It's got Jesus and Mary, and I guess it's John the Baptist. So it's quite an unusual design. It looks like it's hewn in one big lump of oak. We can zoom up on that. And here are some vegetables for the Harvest Festival. So this beautiful brass lacton, if I pronounce that right, it's 1901 in memorial of J.R. Upton. Now if we look at these beautiful oak altar rails, which are made in Coggleshall in Essex in 1909, and they were in memory of Ellen Davis. If you look at this lovely East End panelling, 1910, memorial to Maria Humphreys. You can see it continues all the way around. Now we should look at the east window. And right in the top there's some, looks like some faded glass. Or sort of whitewashed really. Now we're in the chancel, we're just looking at the north window. Again, it's a bit faded places. You can see the vibrant colours. This window is in the chancel on the south wall. All traditional in its design. at the detail. This is also on the south wall of the chancel. Incredibly vibrant colours. Wow, look at the detail. It's beautiful. The purse or bag. So I'm guessing this is where Jesus met the lady collecting water at the well, and the Good Samaritan, perhaps, at the top of my head. So you can see the carving on the rood beam, and then if we pan around, so now we've stepped back into the nave, and we've got this fairly modern window. Now this is a Millennium Window, and let me zoom in. So this window was installed obviously in 2000, and the money has been raised by public subscription. It was designed by Lisa Z. Morgan, based on motifs of the ancient font which I showed you earlier. And it's installed by Tony Sandals. If we can go up, we can have a look. Now I just noticed that there's another court right here. Maybe it's related to the cricketer. And this was the Lieutenant Mountney Courtright of the 3rd King's Own Hussars, who died in Johannesburg. Wow. Only 28. And next to that memorial, we have another memorial to another Courtright. And this lieutenant died in Gallipoli in the First World War. Now I did notice a Disney memorial here, and this is to an Edgar Disney. And if you look at the top family crest, there's a very similar one in Ingatestone's church. Now we're looking at the north wall. We're looking at a memorial to Airy Neve. This is a large window in the north wall, designed and executed by his second cousin Penelope Neve. The two main aspects of his life are illustrated. Now if we zoom in, so we have a parliamentary role at Westminster, where he was sadly murdered, and he's escaped from Colditz in the Second World War. And this was dedicated by the Bishop of Chelmsford in 1985 when it was installed. Let's have a closer look. He certainly had an interesting life. Colditz, look. Sorry, I haven't really done much research on this particular person, but Westminster. So just before we leave the church, I'd like to just point out another lancet window with modern glass, but it's quite striking, the glass, the colour. Now also, I have been told that this window, the Millennium Window, it actually, when the sun comes through, it actually makes an imprint, like a mirror image on this wall. And I've seen a picture of it, it's quite incredible. So that red rose will be duplicated. Right, now we shall leave through the south door. Now I'd like to point out that this church is generally open Saturday summer months, I think between 2 and 4 p.m. So it's best to call if you're not sure. So just carry out a walking route. Now the other thing that you might not realise, this church has got some of the most ancient yew trees in Essex. And there's one on the east side. Now the one on the south side, which is in front of us, as I understand it, I think in the 80s there was a major storm and half of it's been removed. So you can see by the way it's leaning over to one side, what side's missing. Now it is quite unusual to find 3 yew trees that are flanking the church in this way. I do as a hobby measure them for the ancient yew tree organisation, so I've come across hundreds of yew trees, or maybe nearly 1,000 by now. And I can tell you that the one on the west side and the east side are some of the oldest in Essex. So we're going to have a look at the west side yew tree. From memory, I think this, around the girth, this is the second largest in Essex, although not necessarily the oldest because it's not hollow. It's hard to see. So now we're on the outside and we can see the lancet windows there. Now if we have a closer look at this wall, you can clearly see the difference between a Roman brick and a Roman tile. Now I'm not quite sure what this coloration is. I'm not sure if there's been a fire here or possibly from centuries of soot which would have been in the air. I'm not really sure, but you can see wherever you look the huge amount of masonry that's been taken from the Roman villa. Now as I understand it, if it's got this coloration it's from impurities when they fire the stone, the brick. And again you can see so I wonder what happened here. So here we have the outside of the Millennium Window. If we look on the corner, or the coin, you can see the huge amount of Roman brick that's used in its construction in the 11th century. Now we pan up. Now the light is beating me now, but I'll do my best to capture it. Have a look. So now we're looking at the chancel wall, the south side, and you can see over the centuries and decades where there's been use of lime, mortar and cement, which is a no-no on churches, and you can see that's a bit of stonework there. Now if we walk over here, there is a small aperture there, which is a bit of a mystery. So it's obviously had something source of light perhaps. And again, on the corner, Roman brick. It must have been quite a structure. In case you're not aware, but in England you can dedicate a rose bush or small tree to a relative. And if you look behind it, a very red fallen leaf. So when I was painting this church from where I'm standing now, I was struck by how many rose bushes are actually here. You can see just about everywhere you look. Way up there. It's quite an unusual church in several ways. It's definitely got the most pudding stone in it. I guess that's because of its vicinity to the last ice age. And it's one of the churches that's got the most Roman brick in it. So there must have been some sort of size villa here. So now we should continue. Everywhere you look. Now we're entering the north side of the cemetery. And again, if we look at the coins going up, and also a nice thing that's happened, the grass has returned, because we did have a long spell of barren lands. And now we are looking at the nave, and you can see the walls different layered. You can see some repairs at the top. There's a lancet window, obviously with a new stone jambs, but if you look over here, there's an original one, been untouched. And this is the blocked up one you can see. And actually you can see the different bricks. It's like Roman brick and Tudor brick and Georgian, the original top. So here's the more recent vestry building. A pan around, you've got the Disney Memorial. You can see how the architects, modern architects, have to duplicate the style of the original building. You see how the ironworks perish. Look at that. And a very small headstone right at the end. I did notice this had a date on it right on the corner. Now if we just walk further down, you can just see how big this cemetery is, or the land's connected. So St Mary the Virgin Church has got 6 bells in total. We have a 1590 by Robert Mott of Whitechapel Foundry in London, one of the earliest bell founders. We have 3 bells by John Thornton of 1716. These were cast in Sudbury. Now in this year the execution of the Jacobite leaders took place and their titles and estates were removed. We have a Thomas Mears, and this would be 1793. Now the Mears were master bell founders of London for many generations. You'll find their bells all over the country. Now in this year, in 1793, the French Revolution, the Republic declares war on Britain, and also the Bank of England issues the first £5 note, and we still have one today. The late Majesty the Queen and Winston Spencer Churchill, a plastic £5 note. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'd just like to add that St Mary the Virgin Church of Fryerning still carry out baptisms, weddings and funerals, and are involved in the community, various events. And recently we had the Ride and Stride event, which I thoroughly recommend you get involved with if you can. It involves walking or cycling to churches in the area, and you can raise money for the churches involved, as little as you can afford, or as much. So I hope you enjoyed that. I've enjoyed walking around here. Thank you very much.